Hi everyone, and it's never a bad time to make one of these videos, right? Or am I getting rusty? You are the one I wanted to see. That's today's topic. We'll talk about wasted Pokemon, species that for one circumstance or another have not exploited their full potential, be it design, concept, or their role in the games. There are many ways to waste a good idea. So let's start with number 7, Salzburg. I love with all my heart the seasons of the 5th generation. Without a doubt, one of the mechanics that saddens me the most that didn't come to stay. The immersion and depth they brought to a relatively linear region further boosted the magnificence of these games, showing new paths and interactions depending on the time of year. It's a real shame not to have seen future regions get to experience something like this. But whatever, some Pokemon species had to take advantage of the mechanics, appearing for this purpose Deerling and Salzburg, a majestic deer inspired by a species that decorates its antlers during the breeding season. Very ingenious that, taking advantage of the seasons themselves, its foliage changes, giving the Pokemon as the year progresses a different look, and that's all. It's hard for me to understand why it had to be limited to an aesthetic change. I admit that, for example, changing type wouldn't make much sense since the fact that the foliage change doesn't justify that the Pokemon's biology changes so drastically, but I do think they should have given it some small additional change to make it more interesting. How about, for example, its stats? The spring one could be faster for carrying less weight on it, summer and autumn more offensives for being their breeding season, and the winter one more defensive for its tendency to conserve energy at that time of year. It's the least shocking case on the list since the change they need is for me quite small, but it doesn't stop giving me a bit of pity that such a beautiful Pokemon ended up being so forgotten because of that wasted potential among other things. Number 6. Taurus and Miltank. I wouldn't exactly say that they're wasted Pokemon, but something is indeed missing. Do I have to say what it is? You see, when mom and dad love each other, a lot of things happen. And it's born an adorable little bloodthirsty monster? Who, for God's sake, didn't think of giving a common pre-evolution to these Pokemon? It was the perfect occasion to introduce, with a single line, 2 of the key mechanics in the generation: gender difference and breeding. It's especially weird because you can appreciate an effort to have the rest of the new mechanics well represented by a species, like Espeon and Umbreon and the day and night cycle, Pokemon that evolved by friendship, or the red Gyarados and the shinies. They even had the Moo Moo Farm to give them their moment to shine. It's so obvious that I can't understand why they didn't do something with them. Not only that, the Pokedex talks a lot about the calves of both Pokemon, about how overprotective they are of these and aggressive when threatened. What am I supposed to imagine? I don't think I'll ever make a video about Pokemon that need pre-evolutions or anything like that, since I honestly don't think it's that big of a topic, but Taurus and Miltank would definitely be number 1. And what I'm most upset about is thinking about the number of unnecessary pre-evolutions and fillers that have been added over the generations. We all know who I'm talking about, and it's not Igglybuff. Nobody messes with my baby or we're going to have problems. Number 5, Arceus. This has been talked about for years and years, so we won't go too much into it. But I think things have not been done very well with this Pokemon, especially in recent times. Originally, I think it was something intentional. The total inaccessibility to its event, even when they obviously knew it was going to end up being revealed, and yet they left it there. The mysterious events and characters that said Pokemon activates? Why leave that kind of thing there if in no case it had to be accessible? The obvious restriction of its powers, with multitudes of Pokemon that vastly outclass it. It's clear to me that they initially fed that mystery to intensify that sense of enigma that escapes our comprehension. Very fitting for a Pokemon with such divine traits. But then Legends Arceus appeared, a game that promised to at least offer some answers amid the mystery, and nope. I like the intention that the more you research Arceus, the less you seem to know about it. But it doesn't seem fair to make a game with its name for it to appear less than Kricketune. Do you guys want to keep feeding that aura of mystery? Then plant other obscure and enigmatic lore elements that feed the game's story. But that was not the case either. I've never been a fan of turning the originally mythical, desired, and elusive legendaries into some sort of pokegenesis of creationism, but to make it so boring and poorly handled? Really? Number 4. Cast form. All good with this little guy. It's cute, and once again, a brilliant idea. The third generation is all about nature and our relationship with it. So, for this little guy to make an appearance right in the part of the game where we start to get familiar with those concepts and teach in such an understandable and visual way, the weather and its possibilities in combat is spectacular, but then, why make it so limited? Although its mechanic is the weather, it has to spend a turn to cause it and be able to take advantage of its ability. This also doesn't give it any extra advantage apart from changing its type. Its mediocre stats don't prevent most newbies from completely ignoring it and letting it gather dust in a forgotten box on the PC, missing out on everything it supposedly had to offer. What if the weather it summoned with its moves was permanent, like Groudon and Kyogre? Or if incidentally its stats improved depending on the form? What if at least it was its Weather Ball that changes the weather and its form instead of having to spend a turn using Sandstorm? No. Wait, why exactly doesn't it have a form for Sandstorm, which has much more presence in the adventure than Hail? Giving it a Mega Evolution in the remakes wasn't the ideal solution, since it would have been better to take advantage of this gimmick in its own generation, but at least it would have mitigated the damage and been more useful than giving it to Diancie? But who cares, we love you anyway. Number 3. Unknown. I was much harsher and more intense about them in the past. In my childhood, it seemed like an insult that everything around them was so insignificant, but today I understand that it was the point. Kind of like Arceus with everything around them being so mysterious. I appreciate everything they managed to express in such a subtle way. There are a lot, and catching them is a pretty decent challenge, especially in the generation where they debuted with all the puzzles. They even have their own Pokédex and a research team specifically about them, incentivizing you to solve the riddle and collect them. Would it be too much to ask for this to do any good? I still think they should have given a more satisfying ending to really solving all those puzzles. I'm not gonna ask that an unknown king appears when you do it, as when I was 11 years old and I started writing Pokemon stories, but maybe they could take advantage of it to reinforce its concept even more. The point is, one letter by itself is useless, but together they make up and write stories that can change the world. What if, by making certain combinations of letters in the team, they would interact, unlocking even more mysteries, or different Unknown appearing in different generations and creating new combinations? I appreciate Unknown much more than I used to, but I still see in its figure an immense potential that in no way the series has taken advantage of, limiting itself to appear in rehashes of the ruins of Alph without any interest, other than to take away my desire to live with its random doors. Number 2. Megalatios and Megaladias. A picture is worth 1,000 words. In terms of design, they look like the worst thing I've seen in this series by far. How can you turn the Eon duo, who as siblings are similar but maintain so much charisma and personality, into two identical beings, so forgettable and suppressing any character of both? To top it off, with the Soul Dew, they're much better competitively than their Mega Evolutions. So what's the point? I understand the soaring the sky part, but if you ask me, I would prefer 1,000,000 times to fly around Hoenn on the originals. But the number one, and in my opinion most wasted Pokemon in history, is Zinnia. Just kidding, it's obviously Zygarde. Do I have to explain too much on this one? Chernias and Yveltal make up a life-death cycle that keeps the world in equilibrium and allows both to continue to exist, while Zygarde is the one in charge of keeping it that way and the world in balance. Okay, mister, I'll take a nap until a real danger threatens this balance. How about a guy aiming to eradicate the entire world's population except for a dozen individuals who dress like this? Is it enough to make you deign to show up? Well, Zygarde is obviously the biggest loss of the 6th generation's lack of conclusion and its obvious need for a sequel, but haha, 20th anniversary, let's go to Hawaii. It's kind of bizarre to throw away such an important piece of Pokemon lore, and above all, one so essential to understand the message of the games, and before anyone says it appears in Sun and Moon in its final form. Man, for that, it would have been 1,000 times better to do nothing at all. With the disappearance of Lysander, the fact that one of the two legendaries doesn't even make an appearance in one of the two versions, and all the mysteries that Kalos left in the air, there is no doubt that the villain had to return in a much more twisted way, forcing this essential being to make an appearance and give a satisfactory end to the story. But the two Axis lines never came to meet, and the magic simply didn't happen in this generation.